When modern observers stand before ancient architecture, the reaction is almost automatic. It's too big. It doesn't match the human body. It feels excessive. But what if this reaction says more about us than about the builders? What if ancient architecture was not designed to feel large, but modern humans have simply become smaller in how they think, move, and inhabit space? This episode begins by dismantling the illusion of scale. A doorway feels large only when the body feels constrained. A ceiling feels high only when movement is limited. Modern humans live in compressed spaces, optimized layouts, minimal tolerances. Ancient societies did not. Cities were not built to maximize efficiency. They were built to accommodate processions, gatherings, sound, airflow, and time. What feels oversized today may have felt balanced then. Human posture has changed. Movement has changed. Breathing has changed. Daily motion has been reduced dramatically. Ancient architecture reflects bodies that walked longer distances, carried weight naturally, interacted constantly with open space. The buildings did not grow larger. Humans grew more confined. Ancient architecture often overwhelms not physically, but emotionally. Large halls create silence. High ceilings slow speech. Wide plazas encourage observation, not urgency. These effects are intentional. Modern architecture seeks to control behavior through walls. Ancient architecture shaped behavior through space itself. Modern humans are conditioned to efficiency, containment, speed. When confronted with architecture that does not rush, does not compress, does not optimize, the reaction is discomfort. We call it too big because we no longer know how to exist within it. Many ancient structures seem impractical by modern standards. Too much empty space, too much height, too much openness. But these buildings were not designed for productivity. They were designed for presence. To stand, to listen, to wait. Modern society rarely practices any of these. The first mistake is assuming ancient architecture exceeds human scale. The possibility we avoid is this: it was built for a version of humanity that moved differently through the world. And once that thought enters the mind, the stones begin to look less mysterious, and we begin to look more out of place. When engineers study modern construction sites, they expect to see evidence of struggle, mistakes, corrections, reinforcements added after failure. These signs are everywhere in modern cities. But when archaeologists examine many ancient structures, something unsettling appears. There is no evidence of trial and error. The buildings do not look perfected over time. They look finished from the beginning. And that absence changes everything. Modern architecture accepts failure as normal. Load tests are performed because calculations can be wrong. Safety margins exist because materials behave unpredictably. Reinforcements are added because stress is never fully understood. In short, modern building assumes uncertainty. Ancient architecture does not show this mindset. Foundations are laid once. Stone blocks are placed with finality. Structural decisions are irreversible, yet correct. This suggests a culture that did not build while hoping it would work. They built knowing it would. Across many ancient sites, we do not find collapsed early attempts, abandoned foundations, transitional experiments. There are no learning stages visible in stone. The first version is the final version. In modern engineering terms, this is nearly impossible. It implies that stress behavior was fully understood. Material limits were known intuitively. Environmental forces were anticipated before construction even began. Modern civilizations generate knowledge during projects. Ancient civilizations appear to have accumulated knowledge before projects. This implies a long period of observation, repetition, generational refinement, but not in written form. The knowledge was not stored externally. It lived in bodies, habits, cultural practice. When construction began, uncertainty had already been eliminated. Modern structures rely on redundancy, extra beams, backup supports, fail-safe systems. Ancient architecture rarely shows this. Structures are often minimal, elegant, balanced. They rely on precision, not backup. This is dangerous unless confidence is absolute. It suggests builders who trusted their understanding completely, did not anticipate error, did not design for incompetence. This alone makes the architecture feel inhuman to modern minds. In many ancient stone structures, blocks meet with near-zero tolerance, seamless joints, uniform pressure distribution. Modern builders achieve this with machines, lasers, and software. Ancient builders achieved it without visible adjustment. This is not craftsmanship. It is certainty encoded into practice. Modern engineering culture is built on humility. We assume we can be wrong. Ancient architecture assumes the opposite. This does not mean arrogance. It means knowledge was slow to acquire, carefully preserved, deeply embodied. By the time construction occurred, doubt no longer existed. Modern civilization no longer operates this way. We build first. We correct later. Ancient builders corrected before building. Trial and error consumes time. Ancient architecture appears to minimize time spent correcting. This suggests a society that invested decades in learning, but built efficiently once ready. Time was spent preparing minds, not fixing stones. This reverses modern priorities completely. Ancient architecture feels impossible not because we lack strength or tools, but because we accept uncertainty as normal. The builders did not, and that difference alone separates their world from ours. Modern megastructures leave trails, permits, archives, contracts, signatures. Entire bureaucracies exist to make large construction possible. Yet many ancient structures appear without any trace of administrative machinery. No records of funding, no lists of workers, no documentation of planning. And still, the buildings exist. This raises a question that modern systems struggle to answer. How does a civilization coordinate large-scale construction without bureaucracy? Modern societies assume that complexity requires control. To build large, we centralize authority, create hierarchies, enforce compliance. Blueprints exist because understanding is divided, trust is limited, knowledge is uneven. Paper replaces shared understanding. Ancient architecture suggests a different model, one where control was unnecessary. Ancient builders did not appear to reference plans. They embodied them. Proportions repeat across regions not because they were copied, but because they were culturally internalized. Geometry was not taught as theory. It was lived. Children grew up within these spatial rules. Movement, alignment, and balance became instinct. When construction began, coordination required no instruction. Ancient construction sites do not show signs of shouted commands, enforcement mechanisms, supervisory structures. Instead, the architecture suggests synchronized action, shared rhythm, mutual anticipation. This resembles communal rituals, agricultural cycles, musical ensembles. Everyone knows their role, not because it is assigned, but because it is understood. Large ancient constructions are often explained through forced labor. Yet many sites lack worker encampments, chains or restraints, signs of exhaustion or abandonment. There is no archaeological footprint of mass suffering. This suggests construction was normalized, integrated into life, socially meaningful. People did not build because they were commanded. They built because building was part of belonging. Modern standardization relies on machinery. Ancient standardization relied on shared perception. Stone blocks fit together across vast distances, not because they were mass-produced, but because builders shared the same spatial logic. Measurements were not external tools. They were internal references. This allowed consistency without central oversight. A society that builds through shared understanding does not require centralized authority. Such a society is difficult to control, tax, reorganize, as civilizations shift toward specialization, division of labor, abstract governance. This model collapses. Paper replaces presence. Rules replace intuition, and construction becomes bureaucratic. Modern systems appear powerful, but they are fragile. Remove documentation, and coordination fails. Ancient systems required no documents. Remove authority, and construction continued. That difference reveals two very different civilizations. Ancient architecture was not managed. It was expressed. The buildings exist not as monuments to rulers, but as evidence of a society that did not need to explain itself. And that may be why it left so little written trace behind. Modern architecture begins with a question. Who will use this building? Ancient architecture often does not. Many structures appear indifferent to comfort, convenience, efficiency. They feel oversized, silent, and slow. This is not a flaw. It is a clue. These buildings were not designed primarily for people living at a single moment in time. They were designed for time itself. Modern architecture reflects short timelines. Buildings are designed for economic cycles, demographic trends, temporary usage. Maintenance is expected. Replacement is assumed. Ancient architecture shows no such anticipation. Foundations are massive. Materials resist erosion. Proportions remain stable for centuries. This suggests builders who expected continuity, planned beyond personal lifetimes, did not build for profit. Time was not an enemy to be resisted. It was the medium of design. Modern buildings communicate. Signs, instructions, symbols. Ancient structures often do not. There are no plaques explaining purpose, no inscriptions guiding behavior. The building does not adapt to the user. The user adapts to the building. This inversion forces slower movement, observation, humility. The structure becomes a teacher, not a service provider. Ancient architecture often feels as if it expects to be rediscovered. Entrances remain visible even when buried. Alignment persists despite erosion. Symmetry survives damage. These structures seem prepared for neglect. This suggests builders who assumed decline was inevitable. Rediscovery would occur. Meaning would shift. They did not try to freeze interpretation. They built forms that could survive misunderstanding. Many ancient structures resist clear functional explanation. They are too open to be purely defensive, too rigid to be purely domestic, too vast to be purely ceremonial. Modern thinking demands purpose. Ancient architecture appears comfortable with ambiguity. The function may have been environmental, social, psychological, or something no longer relevant. The building does not care if we understand it. Modern architects design around budgets, deadlines, regulations. Ancient builders designed around time pressure of a different kind. Erosion, weather, seismic movement. They did not design to resist time completely. They designed to age well. Decay was anticipated, not feared. This is why ancient ruins still feel intentional. Some ancient buildings become more impressive as they weather. Stones darken. Edges soften. Surfaces integrate with the environment. Modern buildings decay awkwardly. Ancient ones mature. This suggests builders who understood material aging, accepted impermanence, planned for transformation. The building was never meant to remain new. Modern society values immediacy. Impact must be instant. Purpose must be clear. Ancient architecture offers neither. It requires patience, interpretation, time spent within space. This frustrates modern sensibilities. We label what we cannot quickly understand as mysterious. Ancient builders did not expect to be remembered as individuals. They expected their structures to outlive them. In doing so, they surrendered authorship. The building was not a message. It was a presence. And that may be the most alien idea of all. Across the world, modern societies have tried to recreate ancient architecture with precise measurements, advanced materials, laser scanning, computer simulations. And yet, something is always wrong. The replica may look identical in photographs. The dimensions may be exact. The materials may even be superior. But standing inside it, the feeling collapses. The space feels hollow, not ruined, but empty. Modern replication begins with geometry. Ancient architecture did not. Ancient builders started with cosmology, ritual cycles, environmental forces, long-term human behavior. The shape was a consequence. Modern replicas reverse this process. They reproduce walls, proportions, ornaments, but the logic that produced them is missing. The result is a shell, technically perfect, spiritually inert. When modern engineers rebuild ancient structures, they ask, what was this for? Ancient builders often asked a different question. What will this become? Modern replicas demand function. Ancient originals allowed evolution. This difference is critical. A structure designed to adapt across centuries cannot be replicated by a culture obsessed with immediate use. Modern replicas freeze a moment. Ancient architecture flowed through time. Stone is not just stone. Ancient builders selected materials based on resonance, weather response, geological aging, local interaction. Modern construction selects materials based on cost efficiency, uniformity, predictability. Even when the same quarry is used, the cutting, curing, and placement differ. Ancient stones were allowed to settle. Modern stones are forced into compliance. This subtle difference accumulates over decades and then centuries. Modern architecture treats time as an enemy. Cracks must be sealed. Discoloration must be cleaned. Aging must be hidden. Ancient architecture accepted time as a collaborator. Weather was expected. Erosion was calculated. Patina was welcomed. When modern replicas try to look ancient, they imitate decay cosmetically, without understanding it structurally. The result feels artificial, like a face pretending to age. Many modern replicas focus on scale. Bigger stones, taller walls, wider platforms. But ancient scale was not about impressing the eye. It was about positioning the human body inside a larger system. Sound behaves differently. Light moves slower. Shadows carry meaning. Silence feels heavier. Modern replicas often miss this. They reproduce size without recreating experience. A building can be large and still feel small. Ancient architecture was never isolated. It existed within. Rituals, seasonal movement, collective memory, inherited behavior. Modern replicas stand alone. They are visited, not lived in. Photographed, not integrated. Observed, not inhabited. Without continuous human interaction, architecture becomes static. Ancient structures were dynamic ecosystems. Ironically, advanced technology often deepens the problem. Perfect alignment, laser-straight walls, flawless symmetry. Ancient architecture often contains subtle irregularities. These imperfections absorb stress, redirect forces, create organic balance. Modern perfection removes flexibility. The building becomes rigid, physically and symbolically. Ancient builders understood this intuitively. People react differently inside replicas. They feel curiosity, but not awe, interest, but not submission, admiration, but not humility. Ancient spaces often trigger something deeper: silence, slowed movement, instinctive caution. This reaction cannot be engineered. It emerges from centuries of accumulated interaction between space and consciousness. Despite repeated failure, modern societies continue to replicate ancient structures. Why? Because we sense that something important is missing. We feel disconnected from long-term thinking, collective identity, architecture as meaning. Replication is an attempt to recover that loss. But copying the artifact does not restore the worldview. Perhaps ancient architecture cannot be recreated because it did not belong to a civilization like ours. It belonged to a culture that did not separate architecture from cosmology, did not prioritize efficiency, did not fear time. If that culture is gone, then the architecture cannot return. Only its shadow can. Modern replicas are not failures of skill. They are confessions. They reveal what we admire, what we no longer understand, what we cannot rebuild. The fact that replicas feel wrong is not an accident. It is the message. Modern history asks one safe question: how were these structures built? But there is another question, far more unsettling, that we rarely allow ourselves to ask. Who were they actually built for? Not who used them later, not who preserved them, but who they were designed to serve from the beginning. Because when we look closely, something does not align. Many ancient structures technically fit human measurements. Doors exist, stairs exist, platforms exist, and yet steps are uncomfortably high, handholds are too wide, thresholds force exaggerated movement. These spaces accommodate humans, but they do not optimize for them. It is the difference between something built for you and something built with you in mind only as a secondary user. Modern architecture obsesses over ergonomics. Ancient monumental architecture does not. In fact, it often ignores human comfort, efficiency of movement, energy conservation. Instead, it emphasizes posture, alignment, orientation, submission to scale. These spaces force the body to adjust. They demand adaptation. This raises an uncomfortable idea. Perhaps these structures were not intended to be convenient. Consider how many ancient sites feature raised platforms, elevated thrones, inaccessible terraces. These are not merely symbolic. They enforce vertical hierarchy, but not the kind that places kings slightly above citizens. The difference in height is often extreme. so extreme that interaction becomes impractical? Who benefits from platforms that cannot be climbed easily, require visual distance, remove direct contact? This is not democratic space. It is observational space. Look upward. In many ancient halls, ceilings are disproportionately high, difficult to decorate, structurally unnecessary at that scale. Why raise ceilings far beyond acoustic or ventilation needs? Modern buildings do not waste vertical volume. Ancient ones often do. Unless that volume was not considered waste. Unless height itself was functional. Across multiple ancient sites, we find massive stone seats, oversized basins, gigantic carved surfaces, often dismissed as symbolic, ceremonial, for gods. But symbolism usually simplifies form. These objects are complex. Functional complexity suggests use, not metaphor. Why carve something with ergonomic detail if no body was meant to interact with it? Ancient texts are often cited as evidence. Yet many texts are suspiciously vague. They speak of beings of stature, watchers, builders, ancestors greater than men. But they rarely describe them directly. Why? Possibly because they were normal at the time. They required no explanation. People do not describe what everyone already understands. To preserve human exclusivity, modern explanations stack assumptions. Slave labor, lost tools, exaggerated myths, ritual exaggeration. Each explanation works individually. Together, they become unstable. At some point, explanation becomes excuse. And the question returns. Why insist these structures were designed for people like us, when everything suggests otherwise? Perhaps humans were not the original users. Perhaps we were inheritors, occupants, adapters. History is full of reused structures. Civilizations settle into what they did not build. What if staircases were added later? Doors were resized. Interiors were partitioned. Modification implies inheritance. Stand in these places long enough and something happens. People report discomfort, smallness, disorientation, silence that feels imposed. These reactions are not taught. They are instinctive. Architecture rarely triggers fear unless it violates expectation. These structures do. What if ancient architecture was not meant to uplift humans? What if it was meant to contain, observe, regulate, or separate? A structure does not need violence to assert dominance. Scale alone is enough. We may never know who these structures were built for. But the fact that we hesitate to ask is itself revealing. Because once you accept the possibility that ancient architecture did not revolve around humans, history becomes unstable, and some questions cannot be unanswered again.